This leather stamping tool that I have here is called a thumbprint. What this thumbprint is going to be used for when it comes to tooling designs is shading. So for example, on this little piece I have here, it's going to be used for adding some shading on these flower petals and throughout this vine structure. If you compare it to a traditional pear shader, you'll notice that there is a difference. This thumbprint over here has a much longer taper, while this pear shader is, hence its name, shaped after a pear. It comes to a really abrupt stop. It's almost like a teardrop shape. And the main reason that I prefer the thumbprints over this is due to this longer taper. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the pear shader, but for the look that I like to get in my designs, I like this longer taper, especially on flower petals. I want that taper to slim down and fade out towards that flower center, but it is all personal preference. This one is a horizontal line to Berry King thumbprint. As you can see, the texture on the face of that is a lot of horizontal lines. Depending on where you get your thumbprints or who you buy them from, there's a lot of different variations of this tool. You can get vertical lined, wavy lines, completely smooth. It all depends on the look that you're going for with your work. So again, it's all personal preference, but I prefer these horizontal lines. Once again, this is a Berry King, and the size of it is a number 2. I also have this number 1, so the number 1 being a smaller one and the number 2 this larger one. These two sizes work really well for me and the size of designs that I'm typically tooling, but what you'll need will ultimately come down to, again, what you're looking for in your designs and the size of designs that you're tooling. But the number 1 and number 2 are usually a good bet to start off of if you're just wanting an average size. When it comes to using this tool, much like almost all leather stamping tools, there are some basic fundamentals, but once you get them down and you get comfortable with this tool, there's so many different ways that you can use it and so many different variations that you could get off of this one little simple pattern just from changing the way that you shade with this one tool. There's no written rules that say this is how you have to use this tool every single time you touch it. Whatever way you decide to shade these flowers in this vine, or however you want to use this tool, ultimately comes down to your own creativity. That's what makes leather tooling so cool, is not everybody is going to tool the same. You could give this one little pattern to 10 different people and you're going to get 10 different results. So that's what makes it really cool. I'm going to show you some basic impressions that this tool will lay down, maybe give you some ideas on different variations of how to use this tool and change it to manipulate how this pattern looks, maybe give you some different ideas or give you some confidence to try out some different techniques and hopefully give you confidence to improve your leather tooling. At this point in time, this little design has been carved and beveled. This is my order of operations. If you prefer to do all of your shading before you bevel, by all means do that. I just like to carve and bevel all of my designs and then pull out my thumbprints to start shading. Before we jump into actually working on this design, I'm gonna do some quick impressions just to show you what this particular tool, and I'll compare it to the pear shader tool, just compare those impressions in this little open area really quick. I'm gonna start off with the number 2 size. Now I'll do the number 1 thumbprint. And here is this pear shader. Now this is not a Berry King, this is just a craft tool, so the impression isn't going to be as crisp, but here's a close-up view of the most basic impressions that those 3 tools will leave. So looking at this pear shader, the texturing on it is checkered, so that's why the indentation is more of a checkered look compared to those horizontal line thumbprints. You can really see all of those horizontal lines on there now. These tools do have a heel and a toe, so as you can see, there's a big side of the tool and a small side, so it will taper down from large to small. When I'm using these tools, I hardly ever use a full impression like this where you can just see the abrupt stop like that. I will almost always work it with my hands and tip it to where the shading almost fades out into nothing. So let's go ahead and start working on these flowers and I'll dive more into that. I'm going to start off working on this flower right here, and I'm actually going to go ahead and shade every one of these petals differently just to show you the different variations that you can get with this tool on this one flower. And so to start off, I'm going to show you how I would typically shade my flowers. And just like I said earlier, the main reason that I like these thumbprints is because of this long taper. So when I'm setting my tool down into these flower petals, I like to use this bigger end, set it into the tip of this flower petal, and like I said, this first method is how I typically do it. I don't put it all the way into my beveled line like that. I usually leave it just in a little bit, so there's going to be a little bit of a ridge or open space right here that separates the tip of this flower petal and where my impression begins. And as you can see, I'm kind of tipping it. Just like I mentioned a second ago, I don't typically set the tool completely flat on the leather like that, where you're going to be able to see a hard stop on the pointy or skinny side of this. I like to tip it up like that, so when you hit it and leave the impression, those lines, kind of the full impression starts to fade out into that flower center. And the main reason that I like to do that is because I feel like it's easier to add more flow to your designs, if you will. And don't be afraid to move these tools around in your fingers and your hands and tip them and get comfortable with them, because at the end of the day, getting comfortable with your tools is how you're going to improve your tooling. So with my tool in place and tipped, I'm going to start striking this tool to leave the impressions. And if you watch closely, you'll see that I'm going to slightly work it down towards that center, just like that. Just a little bit. Now as you look close, you can really start to see what that impression looks like, and you can see that I was, like I said, working it with my hands, and you kind of got some flow, some movement with that tool down towards the center of that flower. You can see where that impression starts to fade out and taper down, and in between each impression is this little ridge, which really helps focus on that shading and give some depth to that flower. And now another cool way to get some really cool flow in your petals, but giving a little bit different look compared to this, is actually taking this tool all the way out to the very tip of that petal, bumping into your beveled line, and then same thing, fading it out towards that flower center as well. And one thing that you'll notice, you might not be able to see it on camera, but you should be able to hear it, is when I am working and walking this tool towards that center and trying to fade that line out, I'm lightening the pressure that I'm hitting this tool with. So the overall pressure that you want to be hitting your tool with can vary on a lot of different things, like the thickness of your leather, the type of tool you're using, the size and type of maul that you're using. It does take some experience and just getting some feel with your tools, but regardless of that, when you're trying to walk a tool and fade it out, you want to lighten that pressure. And now looking at this, you can see that it's not crazy different, but it does give a little bit different look. Kind of makes these petals look like that shading obviously is just going all the way out, almost maybe like the tips of the petals are kind of folding over. And from here on this particular one, you can just come in with an undercut beveler and just really, or a lifter, get some really good lift in between these. And then if you come look at it from this angle, you can really see the effect that that put on that flower petal, and that looks really cool. One more way is to take this next tool, which is the same tool. I'm just going to be using this #1 size, and instead of putting it in these bigger areas where you would traditionally put this, I'm going to put it in this little crease right here where these ridges on these other petals actually are, and work my way down in that area. Now that's not something you see every day. I don't even know if I've ever done that. I just kind of thought of it, but that kind of looks pretty cool too. And maybe you don't want your lines to flow all the way down like that. Maybe you just want to highlight these petals. This is another way. I'm back to this #2, and I'm just going to tip this really heavy into these petals and just leave a really dark impression on the tips here and not fade it out. Oops. When you do this, you leave a lot of open space here to get fancy with some cool decorative cuts, or maybe make your shading come up from the flower center instead of coming down from the flower petal tip. You can work your way out with some cool shading. Just a lot of cool opportunity there. So just off of this one flower, you can already start to see the different ways you can change the look of a pattern just with one simple tool and changing the way that you use it. Another area on floral patterns that I like to use a thumbprint is going to be on these little stems and vines, but also in the area where this vine structure flows out from underneath the flower. If you add a little bit of shading right here, it's going to help play into that effect that the vine structure is actually coming out from underneath it and not just kind of sticking there on the side like that. There's a close-up on that. If you saw one of my earlier videos where I mentioned matching your tools to the work that you're going to be doing, this little example right here is what I was talking about. I took that number 2 thumbprint to this really small vine, and as you can see, it pretty much just mashed the entire structure of this down. Instead of leaving any kind of ridges or open areas around it, the whole end of it is essentially smashed down. So that number 2 size thumbprint probably would be a little bit too big for that. And in this scenario, it would probably be, for the look that I like to go for, I would prefer to use a number 1 on these vines. And I'll show you this really quick. And I didn't do it perfect, and it might be hard to tell on camera, but there's a little bit more of some open space around that shading, and that will help that vine stand out just a little bit more compared to if it was just completely mashed down, in my opinion. But again, whatever look you're going for, do that. This is just more of what I prefer. When you see me make that first strike and then pick my tool up and look, that's just for me to make sure that I'm putting my mark essentially where I want it, and then from there I'll go back into working it how I like. I hope that at least helps you out some, or if anything gives you confidence to try some new things and experiment with your tooling. If you're interested in the video that I was just talking about, I'll place it right here. And if you have any additional tips or ideas or anything like that, drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear and learn. Let me know if you want to see some more tool discussion videos like this as well. I really appreciate you guys for watching, but until next time, we'll see you.